Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode is very important for us because we are moving with this digital transformation. Even in Malaysia, Singapore, every country, they're moving with this digital transformation system. And we have our expert panelists from around the world. We have our famous speaker, Professor Rob. We have Professor Edward. We have our new guest, Mr. David. We have Dr. Eric Du. We have Mr. Aaron, and Professor Donald as well. So I want to start from Professor Rob. How do you want to analyze today's topic? Before that, I want to say everyone, Eid Mubarak, because today is our holiday and religious day. So we are after Eid Mubarak. After 1 month of fasting, we are celebrating this day. So I want to start from Professor Rob. Yes.
Sure. Topic is digital transformation. The technology industry tends to go through cycles. The first step of the cycle are the vendors positioning the language so that they can move product. We had that with big data. Big data really was about buying storage and building out the storage infrastructure. And I do remember a talk by the then Obama CTO on why big data was bad. And he argued that big data was bad because it focused you on the wrong thing. And eventually the industry came around to analytics, which is what you did with the big data. With digital transformation, it's once again talking about a thing, converting whatever analog processes you have to digital processes and putting in automation on a mass scale. But like big data, a lot of the digital transformation projects are failing to meet expectations because they're not focused on solving problems. You're transforming, but the vendors are focused on selling hardware, and the IT organizations are trying to consume that hardware. I've tried to myself tried to move this into something called intelligent digital transformation, arguing that the first step is not to pick hardware and deploy it. First step is to identify the problems you need solved, prioritize the problems, and then position technology or other solutions against that problem. So for instance, if you have an employee morale problem, you might want to start with something other than technology to address it, because employee morale tends to be affected by personal interaction more than does by technology. So you start with a problem and then you define the solution against the problem. And that's why I've argued that digital transformation needs to be done intelligently. You start with analysis, then you move to the solution matches up with that analysis. You don't jump directly to the tool before you figured out what the problem is. Any more than when you start, you've got a car problem, you don't pick up a screwdriver first. You figure out what the problem is, and then you pick the tool to fix the problem. So that's how I started.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have our new guest, Mr. David. He is CTO for Economic Transformation Technology. So hopefully he has different views, different aspects on technology he will share with us. So hello, Sarah, how are you? So this is the first day for us. So we arrange this kind of session every Monday to Friday. So your contribution will be helpful for our youth communities, policymakers from Asia Pacific. So Mr. David.
Thank you so much for having me on this. Well, I agree with Rob. I have some interesting differences with him. Part of my background is I was an executive at two of the large consortia that helped recover industries back to the United States. But even more importantly, a lot of the work I've done in large corporations and the government, including doing something called a Wicked Problem Roadmap, which goes out 40, 50 years. And I led the first industry roadmap done in the United States. It's really trying to understand what technology and transformation are about. One of my problems I have as I look at transformation like this is we confuse the definition of technology. Most people think technology is a thing, but if you really go and look at the definitions of technology, there's multiple definitions, but the one I really enjoy is it's the application of knowledge to achieve a result. And if we begin to think about technology is using the applications to achieve a result, it changes some of the dynamics that Rob spoke about. It really gets you into understanding what are the broader range of care abouts that you have in each of the organizations, how those care abouts are factored into using the tools, process, capabilities that are required to achieve transformation. But the other challenge with transformation is I think most of the leaders who have trying to lead transformation activities have never baked a cake. And what I see increasingly in transformation projects, and even in things like technology transfer and others, is they're only baking the cake about half the time. The outside of the cake is crusty, but the inside of the cake is real gooey and mushy and won't support much weight. And I think as like Rob said and others on this topic, that is one of the biggest challenges is we give it the time to get crusty on the outside, but the inside is still gooey and moist and can't support the weight of the transformation that the organization wants to go through. And those are a couple of my quick thoughts on it.
Thank you. Professor Edward, how do you want to analyze today's topic? And if you have different opinions and views on transformations?
Okay, yeah. And Eid Mubarak to all of my friends. Yeah, I want to emphasize two things. First of all, again, when you talk about digitalization, we're talking about reducing functions and production and so forth to obviously digits, ones and zeros. And the fact that we've had a information revolution and able to have this discussion is an example of that. We're looking at applications to things like 3D printing, where you can get exactly the schematics. We're looking at the applications for medical research, one of my areas of interest. But I want to emphasize, and this is something that I think Rob was alluding to, and I would emphasize it even more, is the importance of entrepreneurship in looking at the digital economy. That is, digitalization is a tool or an approach or a way of doing things. But what you focus on first is, what is the issue you're trying to deal with? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Or if you're an entrepreneur, what kind of good or service do you think you can offer that's going to be better than other goods and services or unique or whatever? And then you look around for your tools. And, is it a hammer? Is it a screwdriver? Or what is it? And, digitalization can be one of those tools. Well, how exactly does it apply? What's the best application? Or are there better ways of doing it where this is a wonderful technology, we love it, but a hammer is just not the best way to deal with a piece of glass, okay? So I want to emphasize that. If you take a look at the development in the digital revolution in the last 30 or 40 years, which of course started with the information communications revolution, you do see fits and starts. For example, 3D printing started off with, wow, this is going to be great. And then it kind of went into a deceptive period where they just weren't able to get things done. Now it seems to be emerging again. This is something, by the way, Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler are very good on discussing this in their book, Bold. So for those of you who are interested in more detailed discussion, and especially in terms of industries, I suggest that book. But again, I want to emphasize the importance of the entrepreneur trying to look at a problem, looking at a challenge, looking at some new good or service they want to offer, and then thinking of the digital tools in that way, and not basically saying, hey, we've got a hammer, let's bang everything. It might not be that the hammer wants to work. And so that's kind of the thing I would add, at least at the beginning of this discussion. Entrepreneurship, focus on what the issue is, focus on what the problem is, focus on what you want to do with the tool, and then go forward and apply it appropriately in context.
Thank you. Dr. Eric Dew, how do you want to analyze the topics and how we can set better strategy for digital transformation?
Yeah, sure. In order to talk about digitization and the digital transformation, let's look at what is it transforming from, okay? And what it is transforming from is the analog, right? The bricks and mortar and the hard, the non-digital things, what that was before, right? So let's think about sound music or voice, like what we're doing right now, talking. Before digitization, we had live, it's just oral speaking. We have written, you write on a piece of paper. Maybe after more technology, you can type with a typewriter, right? You can do all these things. But the difficulty of that was that each one of those units was not able to be transmitted or converted easily to another format. And digitization is basically the commodification of data that allows data to be converted from one form to another. So it's very much like how humans controlled and learned how to control energy. For the longest time in human civilization, energy in one form was in that form. It was mechanical energy, then it was mechanical. It was sound energy, it was sound. If it's heat, it's heat. And they didn't know how to convert from one to the other. They didn't even believe that there was one, that they were equal. They thought heat is one thing and mechanical energy is another, and they didn't have any idea of how to convert one to the other. And so, you have to live near a river to get the mechanical energy of a running water, and then you burn something with the heat, and that's it. And you didn't know how to convert it. And once, basically, in the 1700s and 1800s, we learned and realized, oh, all these things are all energy. It's all one thing, and we can convert from one to the other. And the medium of conversion now is electricity. You can convert most things from one to the other via electricity. And that allows the commodification of energy. The digital transformation is the conversion of all the different types of data types, okay, that we have used previously, which is documentation on paper, oral speaking, acting, whatever it is. All those kind of things can now be digitized, and then you can recreate them, and you can transform them, and you can convert them, and you can do things like translate, right? I can speak into, I think, my computer, and I can spit it out in a different language, either written or spoken, right? I mean, they can do that. I can't speak it, but I can speak it into the computer, and it comes out in a different language. These are the amazing things about the digitization. And can it be misused? Can it be wrongly used, abused? Of course, like anything else, right? I mean, with energy, we misuse it, and we build things like the atom bomb and all these other stuff. And with data, we're doing the same thing. We have misinformation, we have disinformation, and we have, cybersecurity issues that we have to deal with, and all those things. But at the end of the day, what digitization does is it allows us to commodify the different types of data so that we can convert from one to another seamlessly. And I just want to end with just one very simple example. Just 20 years ago, if you go online and you take a look at a picture, and if it was in a GIF, right, graphical interface format, okay, if you look at that, you needed a special app that can view it, okay? But if you got a JPEG, Joint Pictures Group or whatever, if you got a JPEG file, you can't use that app to look at it. It's completely different. It was non-commodified. You could not convert one or the other. Eventually, people, built the tools to allow you to view any one of these things: PNG, GIF, PDF, HEIC, all these kind of different things. You can view it all in any way, and suddenly you can convert one to the other, and you can, drag and drop and put it into an email, and then you can send it, or you can text it now, right? All these things that it allows you to do is to be able to transmit the data in all sorts of different ways, in all different formats. And that is one of the key benefits of the transformation, is to allow people to recognize, data is data, and then you can allow to change it. And that is the key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Donalds, what type of new things you want to add for today's discussions, and how actually different Asia Pacific countries they can get benefit from this digital transformation process, even though in this situation internet is a big challenges right now. So what are the solutions we have in our hands?
Well, first off, I want to kind of echo some things that Rob said, which if you put the digital revolution into a broader context and you start thinking about its place in society and how it fits in, it's worthwhile to remember that it creates a huge extractive portion. So in order to do what we do with digital things, we need rare earth metals, we need power, we need metals of various kinds, and all of those have to be dug out of mines. In some ways, the digital revolution is a lot slower than we think it is. I agree that we can transmit images and that there's a lot of wonderful things like that. And I agree that there's opportunity for entrepreneurship. I mean, it was so obvious that you could create one interface that would work with both GIFs and JPEGs. I created one with a shell script. It's a simple thing to do on Unix. But the next step is to turn it into something that can be used by people with robust error messages and all those kinds of things. And when you write software, writing the error paths and the error things is more work than everything else. That's really the hardest part for getting a user interface that's useful. You've all had error message like the program isn't working, the program failed. I mean, you can't do that for very long. But when we talk about the commodification of data, we have to realize that the results we get are then based on the data. So Rob in earlier shows has mentioned some of the great fails that are happening right now. One of them is pulse oximeters. Pulse oximeters are something that are used to be able to test the oxygen in your blood, and they became critical during COVID because one of the early symptoms of COVID is that your blood oxygen goes down. There's people with no other symptoms who had their blood oxygen so low that they died or had brain damage and other kinds of heart damage and other kinds of bad things. It turns out that pulse oximeters don't really work very well on people with dark skin. Why is that? It's because the data that they used to make the generalizations to program it all came from people who were basically wealthier and in first world countries where, I don't want to use that term, in developed countries that that the data was available. So that's one example. Another example I want to give is the university system. I've mentioned this before, but in this context, it's that U.S. News and World Report was kind of a third-rate news magazine that had a fairly small circulation. They got the brilliant idea of, I put that in quotes, of evaluating colleges. So they developed algorithms that allowed them to weight various kinds of things so that that they rated universities from first to last. What happened was that became so widely used and so widely read that universities started tailoring their results so that they could fit the criteria that U.S. News and World Report. Were they good criteria? No, actually not. They wound up eliminating a lot of people of color. They did a lot of things that, if we take a larger view, as David said, and look at the problem we're trying to solve, it was a mistake. And I can go on about different kinds of things, but it's really interesting to point out that the data that we have to think a lot about where we got it. Because if we start doing things, credit is another one that has been evaluated by a narrow set of criteria that eliminate a lot of people that could potentially be the most honest people that you ever met in your life. They would pay you back no matter what. But because they don't have credit in previous things and they don't follow the criteria for credit, they can't get credit. And they can't, if they can't get credit and they have no way of financing things, they can't be entrepreneurs. So we're losing a huge amount of value in society simply because the algorithms that are being used right now are normative. They try and make people all the same. They try and create a situation where everybody is the same and everybody has the same things that they're supposed to do in order to be successful. So I want to circle back and emphasize the degree that we have to use human labor to create the digital revolution. When COVID happened, Amazon hired 150,000 new people so that they could be able to deal with the extra traffic that was created by everybody staying at home and using Amazon. But if you look inside of one of those Amazon warehouses, they are brutal. They are the history of basically business management has been a system of trying to turn people into more and more like machines. So one of the early leaders of this, Charles Taylor, would follow people around with a stopwatch and try and figure out, well, if we put this on this side instead of this side, they could do 100 things in an hour instead of 90. And what Amazon has taken that to an extreme that's it's staggering. They have laser beams to detect if people are slacking off. They're allowed 15 minutes of their own free time where they're off from just spacing out or whatever else like that. And it doesn't fit their normative criteria, people could work there for years and they'd be fired. So they're not very well paid and they're just worked to death. And so we have to realize that the digital stuff, and I'm not saying it's I mean, I love to program. I've been a programmer for software engineer. I know quite a bit about it. I've written data communication software for phone companies and all kinds of interesting things. So I think it's wonderful and exciting, but we all have to keep in mind the effect that it's having. It's kind of invisible that is changing our society in some ways that aren't so great. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have our new friends, Mr. Aaron. So how do you want to analyze today's topic?
So to talk about the digital transformation, you're talking about the collection and then the transmission of data and the digitization of that data. What this kind of allows us to do is and I'm going to take kind of more of a broader view here, is to communicate with each other on a much higher bandwidth than was ever before possible, and to stream data at a much higher bandwidth than was ever before possible. That being said, the mechanism by which this data is accessing us, as was mentioned before, is still very soft and spongy. And again, I come back to the word transmission. Having worked in the automotive field in my younger days, that's a pretty common weak point for a lot of manufacturers, even on the vehicle level, let alone, on this kind of larger scale. There's a lot of things that are lost in translation. There are a lot of things that, if that don't benefit everybody. For instance, nobody wants to become subjected to some sort of an AI overlord, as was kind of mentioned with Amazon's practices and how they choose to view people as data. See, data is finite in a way. There is an absolution to these ones and zeros and to the data that they represent. People are infinite. When you try to digitize the human being, there are a lot of walls that simply will not cross over. That is the point where this transmission fails. So how do we prevent this? You have to really look at, excuse me, just one second. You have to look at the human factor, and in corporations, you have, boards, and you have these panels that may not necessarily represent the individual level of this corporation. I think that having a lot more of an input on the company level, as was also mentioned, if you have a morale problem within your company, you have to start by addressing that. Well, that's on a company level. What about on this global level? What say do we, the people, kind of get in how these technologies are applied and used? How many gray areas are there on the governing boards that look over this? Now, I don't want to condemn, the digital transformation, because I'm very excited about the work that Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink. I know that a lot of the results they've been having are promising, yet I don't want to sell them too high. The ultimate goal of things like Neuralink is to be able to digitize the cognitive bandwidth of a human being and to allow it to interface with the computer's bandwidth. However, again, at what point do ads start popping up in your head from data mined directly from your own thoughts? As we talk about the digital transformation, we have to analyze how it applies to the individual, to the human being. How are these corporations, who are already mismanaging our data as is, spamming us with ads 24/7? How are we just going to trust that we're not going to be sitting there having a dream, asleep at night? They're going to be popping up a bunch of ads in our heads, or even more nefarious methods and mechanisms of use. That's kind of one of my things about this whole idea is, and this has been discussed before on the show, trust. How much do you trust these data centers? How do we foster that trust? How do we foster transparency? And that's kind of my analysis on this whole subject. And of course, here in Texas, people tend to be a little bit more paranoid of large organizations. And perhaps that is just my Texan paranoia speaking. However, you also have international advertisers and things like this that are trying to get in on this big data craze, such as China, which I don't mean to condemn China in any way, but they are one of the biggest centers of big data collection, interpretation, advertising. Who's to say that I'm not going to be asleep and have my head filled with ads from China, or political even ideologies from these differing places. So as we talk about this digital transformation, I really want to have a focus kind of on the human aspect of it. Don't get me wrong, the corporate aspects are very important, but how that applies to the individual level, I really want to get a Neuralink once they get ready, but I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that end of it. So I guess that's just my point on this, is how it applies to the individual as the human being does become digitized, as these errors are occurring, as these misinterpretations are occurring, and this advertisement, and this bad data collection are occurring. What is the shadow of this? How do we overcome that so that we can enjoy these technologies? Like this electro telepathy system that's being described almost, which of course is very fringe at this point, but honest steps are being attempted to being made anyways in that direction. How do we enjoy this without it consuming us and coming to rule us as it does in Amazon?
Thank you, Professor Edward. Yeah. So.
Yeah, these are very good points you're making, and because I consider myself to be a humanist as well. What I would say is think about what's going on now as process. Which is what has been going on for centuries. In other words, you had some of the challenges that Donald was talking about. You had the same sort of arguments going on when textile workshops were introducing machinery 220 years ago, and there were a lot of adjustments to be made, and humans were being worked in a certain way. Some humans were losing their jobs because, hey, the machines can do it 10 times better. So isn't that a good thing? In one sense, by the way, it is a good thing, because what happened was machines ended up taking over a lot of the worst kinds of jobs. For example, would you rather have a steam shovel or a bulldozer, a mechanical, vehicle, doing hard work, or would you rather have 100 humans with shovels doing it? And well, most people would say we'd rather have just a machine doing it so we can do other stuff. What do you see at and the comments about Taylor and some of the early pioneers of how to be efficient? And you can talk about Henry Ford, by the way, as somebody who did that as well. Yeah, there were adjustments to be made. And there were extremes, and then at some point people pushed back. What I expect is going to happen with Amazon, by the way, is they probably are going to go more and more to robotics and this sort of thing, and more, just as more and more have human beings basically watching over the machines. I remember, gosh, this was like 30 years ago or more. I was touring a General Motors factory outside of Detroit, and they had robots there. And of course, what it meant was that instead of having as many people on the assembly line doing this or that or the other, you had the robots doing there, and you had some people sitting in front of the machines, checking the data and checking what's going on with the machine. So yes, you're going to have that sort of adjustment all the time. It's been going on for hundreds of years. But I think that the importance is to have the system open enough that when people, for example, get disgusted with working for Amazon, then, well, maybe they demand higher wages, or they decide, well, look, I'm going to go on to something else. And by the way, that's what happens with a lot of jobs. A lot of people complain in the United States that there are certain entry-level jobs that pay very, very low wages and are not very nice jobs. But what happens in this country, at least, is a lot of people will start working at a fast food restaurant, like at a McDonald's. By the way, the guy who set up McDonald's and the assembly line process there did the same sort of thing, looking for efficiency. But what happens is people tend to go in, and then they work there for a year or so. They kind of get some work habits and so forth, and they go on to something else. That's what tends to happen. And I think you're going to see that sort of thing. But again, more and more, to go to the bigger picture, since you like the big picture, and I agree with that, more and more brains are going to be what is the commodity, that is using your mind. And so, yes, working in a warehouse for Amazon is probably not a glamorous job. I've done unglamorous jobs too. I've cleaned toilets. I've done all those kind of things to work my way through school. But I think, and by the way, the other thing, let's remember this: the fact that you have this open process is the reason we're having this conversation right now. It is the reason that the cost of textiles, for example, and clothing in Britain in the 19th century went down, so that instead of having, being able to afford 2 shirts during your whole life, poor people were able to afford a shirt every year or every 6 months when it wore out. And in other words, you created a middle class, because as prices went down, as efficiency went up, then everybody overall in the long term benefited. So process, keep that in mind, that we have an open process, and that the kind of things that we're talking about that aren't very nice basically get worked out in the long term. So that's sort of a message: keep an eye on the process and keep the system open enough that we can have that transition.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, as we are discussing that we have to uplift our society, our organization through digitalizations and all of the technological advances. So what do you think, through this process, even though, like Professor Edward saying that many people's, there are many jobs in the industry which is actually taken by the robots and other things, but what do you think, for 7 billion people now we have in this world, so do you think that digitalizations and AI integrations and these kind of things actually protects human being or help them more opportunities, or what should be the strategy for helping the human beings or developing their skills? What do you think?
Well, at the end, you went to the solution. with any massive change, you're going to get large scale disruption and quite a bit of unemployment because people aren't trained for the new jobs, they're trained for the old ones. And so you've got to go through a cycle of retraining and education. And sadly, in a lot of countries, including our own, we underinvest in education. And we don't do a good job of training people to be agile. We tend to be very fixed focused. For an awful lot of us, the career we choose when we're coming out of high school is the career we have the rest of our lives. And we resist change, even if that change might be better for us. You can look at a lot of the stuff. I mean, one of the big examples is truck driving here in the United States. Currently, we're short something in the neighborhood of 300,000 truck drivers. Yet the truck driving union is fighting tooth and nail to keep from introducing automated autonomous driving trucks. Now, most of the programs showcase that if we introduced those trucks, we wouldn't eliminate all the drivers because the concern is if we were running trucks that were autonomous on the road, people in cars would force them off the road and steal their contents. Also, somebody's got to manage those contents. Part of the job of the driver is to keep track of the load. And yeah, you can sort of computerize that, but you also need eyes on the ground and making sure that stuff isn't being transferred improperly, and so you don't get shrinkage. And so you'd still have drivers, but they'd be more white collar than blue collar. They wouldn't be driving the truck. They'd be able to do other stuff while the truck is driving, maybe a second job, maybe just watching entertainment, and recognize that long haul driving, which is what I'm talking about, is one of the most boring jobs that you can have. A truck, or we're short on drivers, is even though we're paying them in excess of $80,000 a year, which isn't a bad salary. It's just such a boring, tedious job day after day. Nobody really wants to do it. An ideal case of automation, because machines can do the same boring thing over and over again, and it's not harmful to them. It's not that they enjoy it. It's just that's what machines do. Same thing with assembly line work. Same stuff over and over again. It causes muscles to atrophy. It causes pain in as you age. It's hard on your eyes, and it's just mind numbing. It just isn't something that a human should be doing. We tend to do better and be happier when we're in a more flexible, creative environment than we're in a higher repetitious environment. Yet people that have the jobs, they don't want to lose those jobs because that's what they know, and they don't want to retrain. And so if you want to adjust for the coming digital age, you really need to early on teach people to be flexible. Broad education background, STEM courses, the kinds of things that will set them up for an uncertain future, because we really don't know out 10 years what the job landscape is going to be like. So it's very difficult now to train for it. Yes, we're undoubtedly going to need programmers. We're still going to need data scientists. We are absolutely going to need robotics experts. But beyond that, what else are we going to have? Are there going to be robotic repair facilities? And if so, and the robots are intelligent, will we need some kind of the equivalent of robotic psychiatrists, specialized coders that can find certain kinds of bugs that self-learning machines develop over time? It's very likely, but we haven't defined those skill sets yet. But if we had people that were properly trained in mixed classes like psychiatry and programming or computer science, then you have the foundational elements to create those jobs when they appear. But we don't really do that right now. Trade schools are probably the best at training people for certain classes of jobs. People come out of trade schools with a skill, but they're not very flexible with regard to the skill. A regular education, we train people not to have a skill. I mean, that you come out of most higher education institutions and it's not clear what job you have a lot of knowledge, but you have had very little ability to apply that knowledge to complete tasks, which is why I always advise people while you're in school, have a job on the side, trying to get a job in a company, find a mentor. But while you're learning, learn how to apply that learning to real world tasks, because it's that application of knowledge that's going to serve you the best. And explore different things, explore the different ideas and concepts and careers out there, so you get a broad understanding of something changes, what you can jump to. Job security is really about having flexibility. It's not about having a single job. I'll give you one other example. When I first joined IBM years ago, IBM was a job for life company. You went to work for IBM and you worked for a pension. You came out. 10 years were measured in decades, not years. And then IBM had a problem, as did the rest of the industry. And now there really aren't any outside of Japan work for life company. Germany has some too, but work for life companies. And so right now your job is not at all secured. And in the more flexibility you have, the more ability you have to roll with the punches, the better you're going to survive a changing environment. It's not just technology. The company you're working for. I mean, I work for several large companies and where the divisions failed, and being able to get up, find a new path, and keep going was a major portion of my life. And at the end of the day, I kind of enjoyed the change. Other people that focused, they came out of the company, were unemployed for years, depressed, family problems, divorces. It just isn't a great life. So the more flexibility you can have, the more knowledge you can grab early on about the choices you can make later in life, the better off you're going to be. And so if you're a country trying to prepare for this, what you're doing is you're focusing on STEM, you're focusing on breadth, and you're focusing on integrating your education program with industry and industry across the world, industries that you may not be in yet, but you want to get into, to develop the core competencies in your people to do those future tasks when they appear. Your vision is always over the horizon, and you're focused on flexibility, not fixed choices.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Mr. Rob actually give a very futuristic idea, strategy. What should we follow? My point of view is that, like, when he gives some plan for training, development, especially we need to retrain our human resources. What's your advice specifically for these Asia Pacific countries and the Asian countries, how they can develop more technological institution who can train their people for adjust with this digital transformation process?
No, you're exactly right with your question there. We have transition in the way we do education, and we're continuing to need to transition. You know, the last major one before we were in education now was a blended education approach. Before that, it was play, school, work, transition. We're now in a time really of lifelong learning. And for the people who work with me and others, you know, I want to see metrics like them continuing to enrich themselves even in their current jobs. And you know, you see requirements changing. 5 years ago, I wouldn't hire a developer who had not gone to college. Today, it's almost an advantage to hire a developer who has not gone to college, but has gone through different boot camps and things like that. But one of the biggest transitions we have, and it's the one that most colleges and universities have not come to grasp with yet, is we have transitioned from the time when we developed around applications, like when the Pony Express was replaced by the telegraph. That was one application being replaced for another. Then we moved into a time where we looked at systems. But where we are today, and I've been talking about this for a couple of decades, is we are moving into a time where we are in a system of systems. And with that problem, your lines between other jobs, your lines between other industries have really disappeared a lot. You know, we talked about the transportation industry. Well, you know, in a car, you do a lot of things before the engine starts. And the key, when you turn it, doesn't really start the engine. You look at your smart device, your smartphone, camera, computer, GPS, everything else you want it to do. And that's one of the biggest changes, is the systems of systems theory is a place where countries like you were talking about need to begin to embrace. Because what we change in one changes others, whether on purpose or not. And education has to begin to say, how do I begin to work in a systems of systems? Even functions in companies like human resources have to adopt to a systems of systems view. This whole big data revolution really is not just about the data that is going into a database. It's how do I begin to integrate that with sensors? You start with a source, you have data, the data becomes information, the information becomes knowledge, you extract wisdom, but then you have to have action. Well, just that whole intelligence process there lends itself to being a system of systems. And we're transitioning from actually the digital systems we've grown up with over the last 50 years into some that are more biological based. And that's a trend that is going to dramatically accelerate in the coming years as we see the shortcomings in our CMOS technology, as we begin to move into quantum, as we begin to move into biological computing. And those are going to help revolutionize trends, much like we saw the early computers did when they were primarily punch cards even. And you'll see these trends begin to go, but we have to change our setting. I love the analogy of the people digging versus having a tool dig for them. Well, now we're beginning to look at having a swarm of tools work in concert with each other. So we've gone from a shovel to a large mechanical device with a lot more features, functionality, now into swarms where the systems of systems are going. So from an application to a system of systems. My advice for any region beginning to transition themselves for transformation is to begin to look at how to take this lifelong learning and transition it to understand the whole systems of systems approach.
Thank you. Dr. Eric, what you want to add? Even always Professor Edward and our other panelists, they want to add that we need to create more good environment for entrepreneurs, and they can solve many problems. In the COVID-19 situation, we have many challenges. Even we are moving with this digital transformation process. What new entrepreneur can do? What's your advice, and how we can achieve our goal through this entrepreneurship process?
As we have gone around and discussed various things, we kind of meandered from the digital transformation to automation, robotics, and a whole lot of things, as well as dabbled in discussing about education, transforming education, and all these things. And all those things are related. That's the thing, right? They're all related one way or another, and how to help people prepare going into the future. I think in response to your question about entrepreneurship in the face of digital transformation and automation and such, is there has to be a problem that you're trying to solve. Okay, and I think Rob mentioned this earlier in the first round when he talked about it. You have to have a problem you're going to solve, and then you want to make sure that your solution is economical, meaning that it doesn't cost more to use your solution than just dealing with the problem as it is, right? I mean, here's a problem I have. I have to go from point A to point B, okay? Solution right now is for me to just walk it because it's only like half a mile away, okay? It's easier to walk it. For you to tell me, oh, let me sell you this car, it's $30,000, and then you have to go find parking, and it's going to be $20 a day, $20, for 8 hours or whatever, and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to say that's not a solution, okay? But if it's something for me to go, 80 miles, okay, something that I cannot walk, then that's a possible solution. And other people can throw in other solutions, you can share my car, you can do a ride share, or you can rent my car, or you can take public transport. There's a whole bunch of different solutions, and the entrepreneur is there to figure out how to marry the technology that are available, and they're coming, and the beauty of what we have right now is that we're in a renaissance of new technology. Okay, the digital transformation has allowed, like I said before, it allowed the commodification of how data and everything else is combined, so that robots can talk to other robots and all these other things that can happen. And by having that commodification, it allows for that ability to mix and match all the different things. So it's up to the entrepreneur to figure out what to mix and match. And then after you mix and match it, part of the thing that you have to do when you're doing the mixing and matching is to make sure that the price point that you're going to get is low enough that it is enticing for people to say, yeah, I'll take advantage of your service, your product, and I think it's going to be worthwhile for me to do that. Okay, that is what would need to be done. And oftentimes what I see is that there's a dichotomy. There's one group who are more tech-minded, and they build lovely things, but it's not economical. It's just, you know, it's the contraption is way too expensive to be implemented. And then there are the other ones who figure out how to slapdash, stick something together, and sell it for cheap. Okay, but it's not elegant, and it's not tech savvy, and it's not, you know, and it's not robust. Okay, and somewhere in between are going to be someone who's going to be able to find the way to make the robustness and the elegance of with the technology, combining that with the price point and the economies that work well. And that is the few people in the world that can figure that out. And hopefully they can figure that out without, you know, implementing modern day slave labor like at Amazon. You know, they're going to work these people to death, you know, so that we can get that, you know, Amazon Prime next day delivery for, you know, $2 something or another, you know. So that's the thing that you have to figure out, and that's where the entrepreneur comes in, is to sort of have that two brains. That you have to have both brains to have there. You have to understand the technology well enough so that you can say, no, if you do it this way, it's going to be too expensive. But if you do it that way, that's good enough. So you have to be able to know what is good enough technology-wise. And then at the same time, you have to know, like, well, how can I price this so that people will be willing to pay X for it? Okay. Maybe you can, you know, have a subscription model. Maybe you can have some third-party pays part of it. Whatever it is that you can do. That's how you marry the two things. And that's where the entrepreneur comes in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Donalds, what the new things you want to add, because you always come up with a different idea and thoughts for our session.
I want to start out with thanking David for the plug for information systems, because I'm an information systems researcher at the University of Oulu, and we look at systems, organizations, and even your interface with a computer is a kind of system. I was lucky enough to have dinner once with Doug Engelbart, who invented the graphical user interface. And Doug was really interesting. He told me he just thinks that the current graphical interfaces stink, because he said, I didn't invent a graphical user interface. I invented the technology to make graphical user interfaces, and different people have different things that they want to do. I looked at it as a way of increasing human intelligence. So I see graphical user interfaces that would help you do the most advanced possible calculus, and very few people would be able to use them, but those brilliant people could become even more brilliant by using my graphical user interface. And he says, that's not what happened. What happened instead is we wound up with this normative thing with the goal of having the stupidest people be able to use a computer. And that goes back to the normative thing that I've been talking about. The example Edward gave actually is in Norbert Wiener's book, Cybernetics. And Norbert Wiener invented cybernetics. He even invented the term. And he warned about a future where machines would take over everything. I think it's a little slower than we'd like, because I know with self-driving cars, it's a technology that's only 2 years in the future. It always has been and always will be. That's an old programmer joke, but some of these things just take forever to do. And if you think about it, how soon are we going to build a robot that plays soccer if we're having trouble making a robot that can drive a car? Some of the things that humans, fine motor skills that humans do is probably, with any intelligence, is probably going to be quite a ways in the future. But ultimately, Wiener wrote a book called The Human Use of Human Beings. And he pointed out that there's a lot of things that are human that we're not independent. Like, people talk about freedom and liberty and all this kind of stuff, but the truth of the matter is in order for us to communicate with each other, we need language. And in order to have language, we have to be able to have shared models of the world. I have to know you know the same things I do, or approximately the same things, in order for us to develop meaning in any sort of an interaction. And I think that's going to be a while in the future. However, we tend to downplay the human aspects of what we do: art, music, our growth and understanding. In other words, like, I studied sociology at Stanford, and what we understand about human interaction and human nature. My undergraduate degree is in linguistics, and there's no model of language that everyone agrees on. There's transformational grammars, there's functional grammars, there's all these different ways of approaching the problem, but we're still trying to figure that out. And the way that speech recognition works is it's just statistical. It just asks the question, what word's most likely to follow this word? Has nothing to do with human language. It's not even related in any remote way. And how far are we from being able to start understanding these things? And I think one of the keys to develop in yourself and as a person that will allow you to recognize these things is empathy. And I think we have a huge deficit in empathy right now in the tech industry, especially. I mean, obviously somebody who writes literature or something probably has a great deal of empathy. And so one thing I just can't recommend too highly to everybody is to broaden if you're into tech, take some time to do things that aren't tech. Learn to play a musical instrument and play musical instruments with other people. Because when you're playing in a band with other people, there's this beautiful Zen thing that can happen where you're not what's playing anymore. Your consciousness kind of goes away, and just inside you what every single person in that band is going to play next. I play jazz where there's a lot of freedom to do that. We don't, play directly out of off of sheet music. Yeah, everybody knows, and the music just gets so perfect and so beautiful. I play for dances, and the dancers take over. They become the drums. You're in these, they become the drums. The dancers and the musicians become one. It's an incredible experience. And I'd also say I've also seen studies that show that people who read literature become more empathetic. And so read the great books, read Lolita, read War and Peace, read read Dickens. Dickens is an incredible observer of human nature, and he's funny too. He's really fun to read. And I think that from a policy level and societies, we've got to invest more in that. Like in Finland has one of the highest levels of social mobility of any country, and the US is 27th in social mobility. So what social mobility means is if you're born into one economic strata, you're able to advance to the next economic strata. So it's fine that there's lots of jobs, but the people hop from one bad job to another bad job, or a menial job to another menial job. And there's ways of addressing that. Denmark is number one in social mobility. On a society level, having more healthcare, having healthcare allows people to take a risk. People are tied to the company they work for because their company's paying their health insurance. And if they quit to become an entrepreneur, they don't have health insurance anymore. So, and look, they have to pay for it. It's very expensive. So we need to look at our society. Like we want to build the world we live in. We have to look at all of these questions and develop a culture of looking at these questions.
Yes. Thank you. Professor Edward, I think you want to add some points. Mr. Aaron, I'm coming to you. Professor Edward.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points here. First of all, I know that you have theorists who say that at some point everything is going to be done by robotics, artificial intelligence, whatsoever. What work will humans have? And I think that if that's the case, it's going to be so far in the future. We don't have to worry about it as such. By the way, there's a discussion in, of course, one of the basic books on this, the Singularities, there by Kurzweil, that people might want to look at. I've said on previous shows that I want to see Mars terraformed, and Elon Musk is working his way there. And so, if we're not doing all the gritty, nasty jobs that we've been discussing on this show, then we're going to need a lot of people to figure out how to do things like terraform Mars. There's always going to be work for human beings. That's very, very, very important. It goes back again to the Industrial Revolution. Originally, people said, well, all the jobs are going to be eliminated. Everyone's going to be unemployed. There's going to be a handful of rich people, and everyone's going to be unemployed. And of course, that didn't happen because the only way people get rich is they produce goods and services that millions of people are going to buy. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I think it's come out of the discussion from everybody here, and to sort of pull it back to the digital, is that we are the entrepreneurs of our own lives. And the points about education are absolutely crucial. We have education systems in this country that are baroque and broke, to put it the way Peter Diamandis said. They're entrenched bureaucracies with government support that are simply not able to deal with current situations. Before the pandemic here in the United States, there were 1.6 million more job openings than there were unemployed Americans, because of this huge disconnect between the current education system and training system and the needs for the job market. Rob's point, and the sense that Donald's, I think, as well, about having an education system that teaches you to be versatile in your mind, not just train in one very, very narrow field, really is going to be crucial to robot-proof yourself as an individual in the future. But one of the things it's going to require is entrepreneurship in education. And that's going to come up against a lot of the entrenched bureaucracies, education bureaucracies in the United States and probably elsewhere. Finland, by the way, does have a very good system. By the way, South Korea has kind of a different system that also seems to work. But the idea of an entrepreneur is they look at the different systems and they say, well, what is appropriate here? We are a huge country here in the United States. We have local jurisdictions that deal with education. So again, coming back to being the entrepreneur of your own life, and in the digital age, thinking of yourself not as just a narrow worker, but as somebody who has to be flexible, and allowing entrepreneurship in education, I think is going to be crucial to adjusting to this digital age.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron.
Yes, I'm going to be brief. My battery's failing here. I've got it on the charger, and it's still just depleting.
By the way, so's mine. I'm going to have to get off in a few minutes too. My battery's failing.
Okay.
That being said, I can't stress enough how important everything that Professor Donald had spoke about. And I suppose I may have overstated my point. It isn't automation that I have concerns about or anything. It's exactly what he was talking about with the human aspect of it. And I would like to see this push towards humanity in these institutions, these educational institutions. They're so focused on the aspects of progress and of technology and all that, but without humanity, that's how we arrive at that dystopia of thousands of ads spamming your thoughts, getting a computer virus essentially, but for your brain. But and I can't state enough just how much I appreciate what he said with the music and all that, because it is that sense of harmony that this is truly all for. And
Aaron, right after this, I have to go help my daughter with her violin lesson. So,
and that's amazing to hear. I would love to see that push more towards humanity, because we stand at the precipice of either our liberation or, in a way, almost sort of a slavery of the mind to these systems. And it is going to be the education and the human element of it on top of these that allows us to see the liberation and not the slavery. And I suppose that's all.
I love what you
Thank
said,
you.
because I don't talk about STEM, I talk about STEAM. And STEAM adds art to STEM.
Thank you. I have to go for the concluding remarks for today. And thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. Share our content as much as possible. Subscribe our YouTube channel. We have our summit 29th and 30 May. Please join in our session. We are going for the fundraising options because we have to grow our organizations. We have to get more access to the youth community. 40% of the populations around the world, they live in Asia Pacific. So we have to get in. So we need more support. So if you want to support our initiative through our Patreon account, World Talent Economy Forum, you can support our initiative. Beside that, through PayPal's presidentwtforum@gmail.com. You can support our initiative. We are growing every day. We are trying to touch the many youth communities, policymakers, and different corporations. We also getting very good support and connections and communications from the Asia Pacific market. So hopefully your contribution will be very helpful for the youth community, for the policymakers, and small medium enterprise. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor Rob, then Mr. David, then Professor Edward, then Mr. Eric Dew, then Professor Donald, and finally Mr. Aaron.
So one of the problems with digital transformation often is that you see the people that are selling the concept not applying it. And I think this flows down into education and the earlier question we had with regard to what does education have to do this new world. And I think education institutions have to learn how to apply this technology themselves to make the education process better. This week was IBM Think, and one of IBM's big platforms is the idea of giving every employee a digital assistant, granted based on Watson and their technology, but the idea of having something that they can ask questions of that can provide them with the answers they need to do their job and further their careers. Education could institute something very similar, assign each student access to an AI, a digital assistant, that over time gains access to information on which students have done well, which students have done poorly, which processes work best for what kind of people, and over time develop a digital capability to provide mentoring at scale, mentoring at a granular level early on in the student's process to help them find the apprenticeships they need, help them find the career paths they need, help them discover the breadth gaps they have for a better life. And I think the goal here isn't so much just a job. The goal here is to help them find a better life. It's still, when you get to be my age, you see an awful lot of folks that have spent their entire life and now they're retiring, and they wonder, did really make a difference? And I've seen, and by the way, some of the worst people I've run into like that are people that have chased money all their life. They're very wealthy. They've had multiple marriages, alienated from their kids. The kids are all waiting for them to die and give them the money so they can have a free ride going forward. And I just don't, I mean, from their own perspective, that's a wasted life. They chased the wrong thing. They gave up the richness of family for wealth, which turned out not to be very rich from the standpoint of life balance and happiness that they thought. And so defining what would make for a happy life for the individual, because we're all a bit different, and helping the individual, helping the student find a path to that happiness, I think is incredibly important. And that's where educational institutions should focus. And the application of the technology helps them build the core competence of not only how to teach the technology, but how to apply it to actually solve major problems. And that's the skill set we tend to miss in education. We teach a lot of stuff. We don't teach how to apply it. And we don't give students the help they need early on to find a path to what would be a fulfilling life. And so the end result is we have an awful lot of unnecessarily unhappy people. And sometimes these people aren't happy, not because of any failure in their life, just a failure in perception. They don't recognize what it is they've got. And so they don't protect or secure it. So here, the application of technologies that we're bringing forth, particularly artificial intelligence, can help. If schools learn how to apply it and apply it well, then that's also a skill set that they can teach and help them prepare their students for the future world.
Thank you. Mr. David.
Let me just continue where Rob left off. I think as we look at education, unfortunately, in many of our colleges and universities, they really haven't changed their techniques and methods since the time of Socrates. We still use the Socratic method in many of our schools. And it kind of takes me back through some of my mentors and others as I look at this. I taught courses in the University of Texas at Austin. And one of the concepts we use there is you have to tie together communities. It's part of what helped Austin become where it is today. And it was called the Technopolis. You connect the government, you connect the entrepreneurs, you connect the large companies, and you connect the academic resources together to work on the greater systems that are required to advance and transform not just companies, not just institutions, but the whole community as well. I mentioned earlier the concept of a wicked problem roadmap. That's what it is. It's connecting all these various stakeholders and let us go and roadmap things out 40, 50 years in the future. I'm old enough to see ones I did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, tracking today. And the more you take this view, like Rob was talking about, like Donald was talking about, of synthesizing all these pieces together, putting the process and elements around it to create the greater good, that is what's going to help us go forward, because our pace of change has changed so very much. We used to have a linear extrapolation of change. Now we're more into a logarithmic type of change going through our industries, our lives, even the entrepreneurial approach we've talked about. In the 35, 40 years ago, you could be an entrepreneur, and if you stumbled out the gate, you could recover. Today, if you stumble out the gate as an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to recover. And we see that as we look at even very large companies. I love talking about some of the Musk things earlier too. Several of his companies are right around my houses in Austin, and we see those elements coming together. But what's really good about when you look at the way Musk approaches things, he approaches it more as an artist and understands the lack of walls at times. Where if you look at companies like IBM in the past, they were more of an extrapolator view. Let me connect the dots. You look at some of the big healthcare companies, they took more of a scientific approach. You saw people taking really more of a counter puncher approach, more of an intuitive approach, uh, more looking at the stakeholders and elements. The truth is, you have to use all those views if you want to be successful and accurate about where you're going. And those are some of the methods we need to teach, that we need to put into our societal systems so that some of the bias that was mentioned earlier is taken out, so that we have this more, and I hate the word, but the more holistic view that really helps us advance society, advance the individual, and advance the goals of the organization. And I think that's really where we have to go to be successful in this time of hyper change, hyper convergence, and with all of these systems of systems combining with each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Edward, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I'll try to be brief because I'll try to be brief because my battery is brief right now. I actually am a strong supporter of the Socratic method because the way I understand it, and in fact some of the people I work with teach, it's a way of basically having people think deeply, to question, to look inside of themselves. The Greek word is paideia, which is the education of the person as well as, you know, getting knowledge, being able to understand not only the world around you but yourself. And I think that that's going to be more and more crucial, especially as we talk about how to humanize technology and work in a digital world where we're not trapped in some dystopia. So I think that that's important. I would add that again in the digital world and with exponential growth, it is important to have a revolution in education, and part of it is going to be a moral revolution, you might say. The other, oops, sorry, my battery's almost dead. The other thing will be to overcome the institutional inertia that you do have, I'm sorry to say, in universities, where they basically get a lot of funding from governments and elsewhere to simply continue to do what they've been doing for the past 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. My organization, the Human Achievement Alliance, focuses on this integrated approach that people should appreciate their own achievements. And as Rob has suggested, keep looking at your own life. You know, digitalization is a way that we as human beings can flourish. So I hope that people in the Asia Pacific area focus on the technical needs, the needs for revolution in education and so forth, and in industries and in the importance of entrepreneurship, but look at it as something that's going to enrich your life, because ultimately that is what it's about, is for you to live and flourish as an individual and as a human being.
Thank you. Dr. Eric Dew.
Yeah. Well, it seems like our conversation here has segued firmly into the education topic, and so I'll happy to join in on that. I think it was David who mentioned STEAM, adding art into it, into the STEM part of it. I think, but basically what you're talking about is having a more requiring, I hate to use the word requiring, but encouraging more general education within a more liberal arts general education within the curriculum that a student would have, at least in the college level, right? I don't want to specify what's going to be done at the high school or lower levels. And in a way, I think that is useful. I like to add, give some personal description of something, history of myself, to hopefully enlighten some people. So one of the careers I had was a fencing coach. Fencing is a sport, you know, the modern fencing sport, you know, sword fighting, you know, and I was a fencing coach. I've been fencing for a number of years, but I've never had formal training as a coach. I just enjoyed the sport, and I wanted to pass the passion of the sport to the students I was training. And one of the things I realized is that I was not so good of a coach pedagogically as a coach to be able to train people fast enough to keep up with the changes in strategy and the changes in tactics that changes literally within the year. Every season, people figure out how to beat the other guy, with new tactics and new strategy and all that. And if I were to, work on the skills with the student, by the time they master it, that's like 2-3 seasons ago, and they're going to get their ass kicked. So I realized that I couldn't teach them in the way that was what I saw other coaches did, because it was not fast enough. So what I did was I looked at and kind of figured out what is the fundamental, what is the basis that is needed? What do they need to be able to do? They need to be mobile. They have to understand what they're doing. What is the goal of what they're doing? They have to overcome natural or innate, responses and convert what is not an innate response to become an innate response, something that is called System 1 or System 2 thinking, okay? And to be able to build that into them. And that is something that could be done in the education system, okay? To be able to train people in that way. But I don't want to say that my model for fencing should be applied to education, because in fencing, we had a goal. The goal is you get onto the fencing strip and you're fencing another person, you want to beat that guy. And then you beat the next guy, and then you beat the next guy, and so on, and then you win. Okay. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention, and I'm gonna somewhat toot my horn here, is that among the fencers that I've had one person who became a veteran world champion. Okay, he became a world champion. Veteran meaning age 50 to 59 age group. So he joined because his son was taking the class, and he was there and he was watching, and he goes, "Hey, maybe I can take up this sport too." So he took it up, and within a year he took 3rd place at the national championships, and then in another 4 or 5 years he went to the world championships, and he won that. So I have one person who won that. I have another person who is qualified for 2021 this summer Olympics in Japan, and he's going to be fencing for Japan. And then I have another one who barely missed this year, but she will be most likely going to make the 2024 Olympics in Paris. And several other people who have become, collegiate champions and so forth. And the ones that I'm most proud about are those who, when they went to college, they went to a college that did not have fencing as a program there, and they built it. They built their own. They loved the sport so much they created it, and then they started a club and all that. That to me is more of a sign of my influence and my success, rather than the ones who became Olympians. Because obviously those who became Olympians, they had the training of other people who helped along. I was the seed. I helped them at the beginning, but they got additional training from other people. So but anyway, it doesn't apply in the education system. We cannot encourage people to do something like this because we don't have an expectation of what the goals are for each individual. For a person like me, I would love to have done entrepreneurship, but for others, they would just love to do nothing more than just, sit behind and do accounting, for God's sakes, or something like that. Some people love doing things like that. Other people love to do things where they're helping others, mentorship or something, and others like to get their hands dirty, fixing cars or something. Okay, you can't then apply a universal set of courses and curricula and say, take these and then it will fit you. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So, and to inject entrepreneurship into the education system is what Dr. Edwards was talking about. I don't know if that would be good either, because now you add an extra incentive there, which is money, to make money on that. And you're going to have people trying to make money off of students, presumably, I guess. I'm not sure how. Okay. And now you're going to have people say, hey, I help you, now you got to pay me back, or something like that. And there might be rebellion. People are going to say, well, I don't want to do this anymore because I don't want to pay you. I don't know exactly what the people's thoughts will be, but we can't really specify how to do this in an educational way because we don't know what the future is for each individual person. For people who went to my club, to my fencing club, we had a singular goal, which is to do well in the sport of fencing. But if they want to do well, like in track or basketball, my program has no help for them. My program has no benefit to them, or it could actually be more detrimental because of the way I was doing the training, that it was more in line with the sport that I was working on. So it behooves us when we want to talk about education and changing education is to, I think to the extent of going down to the foundations and looking at what really is necessary. That is a valid question to ask. But then in order to answer that, you have to answer what is education for, okay? And we don't have an answer for that in terms of what is education for. A lot of us here in your forum here is discussing, so that we can have people who are capable and skilled in doing work. I don't think we want to do that. I don't think we want to say that you go into education so that you get skilled so that you can become a cog in a wheel of something. Even if it's a really fancy wheel and you're a really fancy cog, I don't know if that's what we want to tell people. Okay, I think people want to be educated for whatever reason they want to be educated. And after the end of the day, they want to come out and they don't want to do anything more than, lay back and smoke a joint and drink beer. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with letting people do that if that is what they want to do, because we cannot dictate to people what their life should be and then forcing it upon them with an educational program. But one thing I do want to say is that what David was talking about is Socratic or changing things. I think the key thing that we want to do is to remove the siloing of the different topics, right? Right now we have physics and we have biology. We don't even have biophysics. It's either physics or biology or chemistry. And each one of these things are all so siloed and they never talk to each other. People in the physics department do not encourage their students to go take have a listen at this lecture by the chemistry professor, blah, blah, blah. And same thing with the math and the history and all that. And if it's with outside, humanity versus sciences, they never intersect, right? The professors don't intersect, the students don't intersect, and there's a complete siloing of the education things. And I think if there's one thing that could be done is at least have them more integrated, okay? Teach history of math, teach the history of science. It'd be great to hear what, Doug Engelbart did and you understand that in a historical sense rather than in a technological sense, things of that sort. So, and that's all I want to say. I don't want to drag this on. So.
Thank you. Professor Donald, what's your concluding remarks today?
Well, I want to support what some others have said. David, Stanford University was, Fred Terman deliberately tried to break down the silos. He would give, if you were a businessman, you'd pay 10 cents on the dollar to go to Stanford. And he encouraged them to take various kinds of courses. And, the result was ultimately Silicon Valley. And, but the thing I want to emphasize is going back to the human aspect of it. Rob mentioned the idea of a digital assistant that you could ask questions and it would give you answers. But where do those answers come from? How likely is it that a digital assistant in any reasonable future time would have the knowledge to be able to answer questions in a way that, Jeopardy is one thing, but in reality, how do you know? I had an experience once where I got stuck in San Francisco after the last train had gone to Palo Alto, and I was like totally. This was before Uber. I just had no idea what to do, and this homeless guy I started talking to him, and he said, well, you know, there's a bus that runs from 7th and Mission. So if you go here to the train station to 7th and Mission, you can catch a bus that'll take you back to Palo Alto. And he was right. And while I was walking there was a group of people, and they said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, you know, 7th and Mission. And they said, this isn't the best neighborhood. Why don't you walk with us? And one of the guys was a retired sheriff, and they brought me over there. And it made me realize that every human being knows things I don't know, all of them, every single solitary one. And it goes back to what David is saying. You can break down the silos yourself. Like part of the reason that there's silos is because of this incredibly advanced vocabulary within each of the different silos. But you can read, if you read the introductory text to anything, you have enough knowledge that you can start asking questions in that field. I do it all the time. I'll sit down next to an expert at quantum physics in Palo Alto and get him to explain things to me. I know a little bit more. It's like going to a class. And it's a matter of the openness and the realization, the aha, that, as I said, every single solitary person is a door into another world, and they're worth value. And leading on that, I don't know how to create cultural change. I'm actually working on that. That's part of my research. But in Finland, they dropped the idea of separate classes for K through 12. So there's no math, science, Finnish. They actually make everybody learn English too. But they merged it into one thing so that they do the kind of stuff that others have talked about, where they look at math and its history. I mean, I really didn't get statistics until I read a book called The History of Statistics. And then I just totally got it after that. Everything made sense. And so people are doing that in the world. And if your country's a country that's like the United States, that has very traditional ways of doing it, and it's not just the universities or schools' fault. I mean, every time somebody tries to change our teaching techniques, people go down to the school boards and riot and recall the school board that tried to do it and stuff like that. But you yourself can do it. You have the ability, and it goes back to what I said, spend a little time reading great literature. I mean, in each of your countries, you have different great literature. It's not just English that have great literature, because it gives you a way of starting to see into other people's views. Because when people say you should put yourself in another person's shoes, you can make the mistake of asking the question, what would I do in this circumstance? But that's not the question you need to ask. The question you need to ask is, where is this person coming from? How you've got to put yourself in the other person's life, in the other person's world, without judgment. You've got to be able to be open. And that, no matter what career, entrepreneurs, the best, you can't know everything. The best entrepreneur is find some company is somebody who loves finance, and somebody who loves engineering, and somebody who loves marketing. You don't have, if you try and do all those things, you're very unlikely to succeed. So my closing remarks are, expand your empathy. Try and ask everyone around you questions. Oh yeah, I wanted to close, but I'm going to say one other thing. There's a guy that Richard Wiseman, who studied luck in England, and he found out that the people who were the luckiest were the people who talked to the most other people, and were the least judgmental. So you can't really change your luck in a random sense. You can't go and all of a sudden start winning at roulette or something like that. You can't do that. But there's all kinds of luck. And you'll become the luckiest if you learn to listen to what's in other people's worlds and not be judgmental and really try and get involved in them. So it's important for the digital transformation, because ultimately all this stuff is just, pieces of metal and rare earth unless we use it to make human lives better.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining today's session. Today's session is really, really helpful. We learn a lot about digital transformation, our education policy, and how we have to think outside the box. This is also important. So we learn a lot from this session, but at present situation, we do not have alternative. Malaysia has third time movement control order. So we have to go for the digitalizations. We need to train our people through the digitalization process, and there is no choice. Even I am from developing nations. I saw that those who implementing technology, those who adapted technologies and this kind of things, even economically, they are improving. They're getting their more success. So thank you for joining today's sessions, and it's really, really great session for us. Thank you, Professor Rob, Professor David, Dr. Eriks, and Mr. Donald for joining today's session. Thank you everyone, and Eid Mubarak everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
They're not mutually exclusive.